And how many times? Thank you in advance. Well, thank you, John. Yes, I saw Elvis many times in concert in Memphis or around Memphis, wherever he was close. We would always, go, and I was at the.
Donna Presley finally reveals all the Graceland lies. They called it the House of Love, a mansion built from music wrapped in gold gates and southern charm. But if you ask Donna Presley, Graceland was never about love. It was about control. And the stories they made sure no one ever questioned. For years, the world saw the postcards, the guided tours, the velvet ropes. They saw the mansion where Elvis laughed, sang, and dreamed. They didn't see the doors that stayed locked, the whispers that stopped when someone walked in, or the way silence hung in those long hallways like a curtain no one dared pull back. Donna grew up believing in the fairy tale, the king's home, the beating heart of Memphis, filled with music and laughter. She was proud to be part of it. The Presley name carried weight, carried myth. But as she got older, she started noticing things that didn't match the stories being told. Rooms no one talked about, people who suddenly disappeared from the photo albums, conversations that ended the second she entered the room. She remembers the smell of lemon polish on the staircase banister, the sound of distant piano keys, and the heavy air of a house that never really slept. But underneath that beauty was tension. A quiet one, the kind that doesn't make a sound but still fills the air. Elvis was surrounded by people who adored him publicly and used him privately. And Donna saw it, even as a young girl, though she didn't yet have the words to describe it. They called it Graceland, a name that promised peace. But there was no grace in what went on behind those walls. Family dinners that ended in tears, letters that were never answered, and secrets buried beneath contracts and signatures. Donna once said that even as a child she could feel the pressure. The house wasn't a home, it was a stage, and everyone had a role to play. Elvis played the king, always smiling, always generous, always giving more than he should. The others, family, staff, friends, played their parts too, some out of loyalty, some out of greed, and some because they knew if they ever stopped pretending, the entire image would crumble. There was one night she never forgot. She'd walked past the kitchen after midnight. The light was on. Elvis sat alone at the table, hunched over a stack of papers. Not music, not lyrics, documents, legal ones. She didn't understand it then, but later she realized that was the night he found out how much of his own life he didn't own anymore. Donna didn't say anything. She just stood in the hallway watching him run a hand through his hair, that weary look of someone who'd given everything away, even his peace. That moment stayed with her. It was the first time she saw Elvis not as the king of rock and roll, but as a man trapped in a castle built from other people's dreams. Years later, when the tours began and the gates opened to the public, people thought they were walking into a shrine of truth, a frozen memory of a man who changed the world. Donna knew better. She watched as rooms were repainted, stories rewritten, entire moments erased. The walls still stood, but the truth inside them had been scrubbed clean. She would hear the guides tell visitors about the love that built this home. She would nod, smile, and stay quiet, because speaking out meant betraying family. And for a Presley, that was the one sin you couldn't come back from. But the silence, it started to rot. She knew it. Every tour, every photo op, every souvenir sold under the name Graceland felt like another layer of pain over a wound that never healed. She started keeping her own notes. Small things at first, dates, conversations, bits of truth she didn't want to lose. People thought she was just sentimental, but Donna was preserving what no one else wanted remembered. And when people asked her years later what it was like living in Graceland, she would always pause. Because how do you tell the world that the happiest place on earth for Elvis Presley was also the loneliest place he ever lived? The truth, she would say, was simple. Graceland was never just a home. It was a story, written by people who couldn't stand to let Elvis be human. A man with doubts, a man with fears, a man who, even surrounded by a mansion full of people, still felt completely alone. And when Donna finally decided to speak, it wasn't to destroy the myth, it was to free him from it. Because the lies didn't just haunt the house, they lived in it. Every photograph, every piano key, every whispered memory carried the same unspoken question. If Graceland was built on love, why did it leave so many broken? And as Donna would later admit, the truth wasn't buried in the backyard. It was hiding in plain sight. Inside the walls, everyone thought they knew. The world remembers Elvis as the man who had everything: the cars, the money, the voice that could shake heaven itself. But Donna remembers the look in his eyes when the cameras stopped rolling. Tired, distant, and searching for something he could never find inside that mansion. By the mid-1970s, Graceland had turned from a refuge into a fortress. People came and went, but few truly cared about the man who lived there. The house was full, but Elvis was surrounded by emptiness. Donna would visit, still young but old enough to notice the changes, the way conversations grew shorter, laughter rarer, and trust almost non-existent. Behind the smiles, there were arguments about everything: money, control. Who had the right to speak for Elvis when he wasn't in the room? Vernon Presley, his father, was aging and weary, often leaning on others who didn't always have the family's best interest at heart. And Priscilla, though long separated, still hovered at the edges of his world, a reminder of love lost and the family life that fame had stolen from him. Donna could feel the tension, though she didn't yet understand its full shape. The Memphis Mafia, those friends who once protected him, had become something else. They joked and laughed, but behind their loyalty was fear. No one wanted to lose access. No one wanted to be cut out of Graceland's orbit. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was power. And power brings out the worst in people. There were days when Elvis tried to hold it together, to make Graceland feel like home again. He'd walk the halls in the early morning, guitar in hand, singing softly to himself. Donna would hear it from down the corridor. Fragile, unfinished melodies that carried both beauty and sadness, but even those songs started to fade. He was tired of pretending to be okay. She remembered one afternoon when he sat her down in the music room. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "They keep telling me this house is my kingdom," he said, "but I feel more like a prisoner in it." That line stayed with her forever, because it wasn't just about Graceland, it was about how everyone wanted a piece of him, and how little of himself he had left to give. To outsiders, the Presley family looked united. They smiled for photographs, appeared at events, signed autographs, and gave carefully rehearsed interviews about love and legacy. But behind closed doors, it was chaos. Arguments over who managed what, rumors about secret bank accounts, even small decisions, like which room could be shown to reporters, became battles of pride. Donna began to realize how many lies it took to keep the illusion alive. People said Elvis was happy, that he was in control, that the gates of Graceland were closed for peace and privacy. But the truth was far from peaceful. He was surrounded by handlers, lawyers, and opportunists, people who needed him to keep performing, keep spending, keep existing as the myth they could profit from. She saw how isolated he became: meals eaten alone, phone calls made in hushed tones, days where the only light in the room came from the glow of the television. Donna once overheard him tell a friend, "I can't even trust my own shadow anymore." And she understood then that the king of rock and roll, the man adored by millions, had become invisible in his own life. Every time she visited, she noticed another wall going up. Not the kind you can see, but the kind built out of exhaustion. He started closing himself off from family, even from her. He'd smile, hug her, ask how school was, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes anymore. It was like he was already slipping away, piece by piece, behind a wall of fame, pills, and manipulation. And yet, there were moments that reminded her of the man underneath it all. The uncle who laughed at his own jokes, who cried watching gospel performances, who spoke about God like he was the only friend who'd never betrayed him. But those moments were rare now, fading like echoes in a house too big for one man's soul. Donna started keeping those memories close, because she could see what no one wanted to admit. Graceland wasn't a monument to Elvis's greatness. It was a monument to everything that broke him. The pressure, the greed, the false smiles that drained his spirit. And late one night, when she passed his room and heard him softly say, "They're turning my home into a stage," she finally understood. Graceland wasn't his escape. It was his cage. By the time he realized who was pulling the strings, it was already too late. The gates that once kept the world out were now keeping him in. When Elvis was gone, Graceland didn't fall silent. It got louder. The mourning turned into marketing, and the man became a brand. Donna watched in disbelief as her cousin's name, once spoken with love and reverence, was suddenly printed on T-shirts, coffee mugs, and souvenir snow globes. The house that once echoed with music now echoed with cash registers. In the early days after his death, chaos ruled. Family members argued not about how to honor him, but how to own him. The estate was drowning in debt, yet everyone seemed to be fighting for a piece of whatever was left. Donna remembers those tense meetings, the whispers in corners, the folded arms, the forced smiles. Everyone claimed to love Elvis, but love had turned into leverage. She stayed quiet, watching as decisions were made by people who had once barely been allowed past the gate. They called it preserving his legacy. But Donna knew what it really was. Control. They weren't protecting Elvis's memory, they were rewriting it. The stories began to shift. The flaws were scrubbed away. The truth was edited until it fit inside a gift shop. Priscilla took charge, at least on the surface. She became the face of Graceland's rebirth, the woman who turned heartbreak into empire. Fans adored her for saving what was left, and maybe part of that was true. But Donna couldn't ignore the emptiness behind it all. Elvis's private world, his letters, his belongings, even his rooms, were now attractions. People stood in line to walk through spaces that had once held grief, laughter, and secrets. The velvet ropes couldn't hide the truth. This wasn't preservation, it was performance. Donna began noticing how certain things were omitted, names never mentioned, events never acknowledged. There were photos removed from albums, stories corrected in interviews, and rewritten accounts of Elvis's final years. The more polished the legacy became, the more the man himself disappeared. She tried to speak up once, just once. She mentioned how Elvis had been unhappy in his last days, how he'd felt trapped, manipulated, and betrayed by people he trusted. The response was swift and cold. "Don't talk like that," someone warned. "You'll ruin what we've built." That was the moment she understood the truth wasn't welcome inside Graceland anymore. From then on, she became the outsider. Invitations grew fewer. Calls stopped coming. She was family by blood, but not by silence. And in that house, silence was currency. Meanwhile, the Graceland story grew bigger, cleaner, safer. It became the museum version of Elvis, one that fit perfectly into headlines and documentaries. The broken man who struggled behind the curtain was replaced by a smiling legend frozen in time. Donna couldn't recognize him anymore. She remembers standing in one of the tour lines years later, blending in with the crowd. She wanted to see it through their eyes, the fans who came from across the world to touch the legend. As the guide spoke about the love that filled this home, Donna felt something break inside her. Love? She remembered the shouting behind closed doors, the letters that went unanswered, the look in Elvis's eyes when he realized that the people closest to him were also the ones taking the most. And yet, she didn't hate them. She pitied them, because deep down she knew why they clung so hard to the myth. The truth was too heavy to carry. Years passed. Millions of tourists came and went. Graceland became an empire of memory, but none of it felt real. Donna once told a friend, "They built a kingdom out of what killed him." The words lingered in her chest for years. She had notebooks filled with things she remembered, moments, dates, and details the world had forgotten or deliberately erased. Every page was a rebellion against the story being sold, and with every passing year, she felt the same ache. The world had fallen in love with the ghost, not the man. The empire around Graceland grew richer, but the truth stayed buried, under layers of polished marble and official statements. One day, she opened a newspaper and saw a headline calling Graceland the greatest tribute in American history. She laughed, not out of joy, but disbelief. Because if Elvis could see it, he wouldn't recognize it. The man who once dreamed of freedom had become a monument to control. And that was when Donna made her decision. She would no longer keep quiet, because every time she saw the mansion's white columns gleaming under the Memphis sun, she heard the same question whisper through the trees, a question she could no longer ignore. If Elvis saw what Graceland had become, would he still call it home? For most of her life, Donna Presley kept her silence. She thought that was loyalty, protecting the family name, protecting Elvis's image, protecting the dream everyone wanted to believe in. But the truth doesn't disappear just because no one speaks it. It waits. It festers. And one day, it demands to be told. When Donna finally began to talk, she didn't do it with anger. She did it with grief. Because the lies about Graceland weren't just stories told to the public, they were walls built inside her own family. Every brick laid by fear, shame, and the need to protect a version of Elvis that never truly existed. She said it started small. The edits, the omissions, the denials. People twisting words, reshaping timelines, creating official truths. But the worst part wasn't what they said, it was what they erased. Whole pieces of Elvis's heart cut out because they didn't fit the image. The struggle, the loneliness, the moments of regret, all gone, replaced by a smiling legend in a jumpsuit. Donna revealed how letters from Elvis were locked away, his private notes destroyed or hidden to preserve the brand. There were things he'd wanted fans to know, his fears about money, about being trapped, about how Graceland had stopped feeling like home. But those words never saw daylight. They said it was to protect his privacy. She knew it was to protect the illusion. Even years later, speaking those truths came with consequences. She was called bitter, disloyal, crazy. People told her to stop talking, to let the past rest. But Donna had seen what silence did to Elvis, how it isolated him, how it killed his spirit long before his body gave out. She refused to let history repeat itself. She described nights when Elvis sat alone, staring out at the gates from his upstairs window, the lights from the road flickering across his face like ghosts. "They love me out there," he once said, "but I don't even know who I am in here." Those words haunted her for decades, because when the world turned him into an icon, they stripped him of his humanity, and then turned his home into a museum of his suffering. Donna's voice shook when she spoke about what Graceland truly became, a monument not to Elvis's joy, but to his captivity. She said every tour, every carefully crafted display was part of a lie, a story built to comfort fans, not to tell the truth. "They say Graceland was where he found peace," she said softly, "but peace never lived there." Only ghosts? Her decision to speak wasn't about revenge, it was about liberation, for him and for herself. Because every time the world celebrated Graceland, Donna felt the weight of what had been stolen. Not just from Elvis, but from every person who loved him for who he really was. She wanted people to know that Elvis wasn't a myth carved in stone. He was fragile, kind, lost, and human. He wasn't the king of some perfect kingdom. He was a man who gave too much of himself to people who saw him as prophet, not person. And the lies that covered his truth didn't end with his death. They were built into the very foundation of Graceland itself. When she was asked why she waited so long, she said it wasn't fear that held her back, it was heartbreak, because the truth hurts most when it belongs to someone you loved. But silence, she learned, hurts even more. There was a final story she kept close for years, something Elvis said during one of his last conversations with her. He'd been quiet, distant, lost in thought. Then he looked at her and said, "They can have the house, baby. Just make sure they don't take my soul with it." Those words became her promise, and now telling the truth is how she keeps it. Donna knows that speaking out won't change the past. It won't bring Elvis back or undo the damage, but it can give people something the tours never could, a glimpse of the man behind the music. The one who laughed too loud, loved too deeply, and died still searching for peace inside a house built from dreams and deceptions. So when people ask her why she's revealing it all now, she simply says, "Because it's time." Graceland was built to protect a myth, but Elvis deserves to be remembered as a man. Because in the end, the truth isn't the enemy of legacy, the lies are. And as Donna puts it best, the world calls it Graceland. But grace was the first thing that left. Some stories aren't meant to stay buried, especially the ones written in silence. If you believe Elvis deserves to be remembered for who he truly was, share this story, because legends don't live forever, but the truth can. And sometimes it takes one voice to bring it home. Voice to bring it home. Voice to bring it home.